It's not unusual to be loved by anyone. It's not unusual to have fun with anyone. But if I ever find that you've changed at any time, it's not unusual. Hey, 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 it's not unusual.
By the late 60s, a mood of change and radicalism was beginning to take over Britain. Inspired in part by the American hippie movement and the Summer of Love, attitudes towards sex were becoming increasingly liberal. And with homosexuality newly decriminalized, same-sex love was firmly part of that agenda. New ideas about homosexuality were emerging, and with them whole new words and terms to describe these experiences.
The first time I heard the word gay was on a TV news program in the late 60s, about 68, when it was a kind of "and finally" piece on the news, talking about the hippie revolution and saying, and you know, it's kind of "and finally you'll never guess what they're doing next in California." And they were talking about something called the Gay Liberation Front, and it said these are homosexuals who believe that they are normal and have the same rights as everyone else. And I was sitting watching this and, with my whole family, watching it on the news, and inside I was saying, yeah, that's right, that's right.
I remember the first time when I heard somebody mention gay in a room, I questioned that, and I said, what do you mean gay? Gay happy? What do you mean gay? And they also talked about stereotypes. They talked about actually coming out of the closet, which meant, you know, being a lesbian everywhere, not just hidden in a ghetto or behind closed doors at home, but being a lesbian out in the open, on the streets, in the parks, in every pub in Manchester, and not in the one pub in Manchester, because then you're back to the ghetto. And I found this all very, very exciting, because I thought to myself, here we are defining ourselves.
To me, it was a big revolution in a way, wasn't it? Particularly for the men, it was wonderful that they didn't have to, they could come out, as they called it. But I didn't take much part in it at all. I don't ever remember going on a march. I was asked to, but we hadn't time. We were too happy and content in our own world, I think that's what it boiled down to.
Up until about the age of 14 or 15, it was all medical textbooks and wanking, along with Jean Genet. After the age of 15, Gay Liberation Front came along, and suddenly there were little tracts that I could read that told me that I wasn't sick, which was wonderful. I think deep down I knew it anyway. So the idea of, gay is good, gay is proud, and gay is angry, a chant that we're still occasionally running out to this day, started off for me then, and it was a wonderfully mind-opening experience. GLF gave a form to it, so I wasn't doing it in the dark or by myself, which was actually quite wonderful.
The British Gay Liberation Front was formed in 1971, a pressure group which aimed to shake up ideas about homosexuality. They held colourful demonstrations which generated a huge amount of publicity and brought gay ideas out to the public at large. For those involved, it was an experience which changed their lives forever.
GLF taught us that anything was possible, not just in terms of your sexuality. I mean, I'm using words like sexuality, gay, sexual liberation. none of us knew what sexuality was. None of us knew what gay was. None of us knew what sexual liberation was. I mean, we were learning, we were thinking on our feet, we were learning as we went along. It was doing your own thing, being your own person. It was magic. It was magic. It was like somebody had taken my brain out of my head, washed it out of all the crap, and put it back in with a sensible head. It was just mind-blowing.
I thought it would be really cheeky to write lesbians are everywhere in yellow all over the centre of town. And we did it one night. We went out with yellow paint, lesbians are everywhere, lesbians unite and fight, because we had to unite and fight. When you're getting politicised, you realise that you can't do things on your own. You need other people. So this Lesbians Unite and Fight went up on every bridge in and out of the city, north, south, east and west, and it was brilliant, because the next morning we went into town and you should have seen the traffic all jammed up again, one another, all sitting staring at lesbians are everywhere. It was a hoot.
A group of radical drag queens moved into a house next to the school that I was at. The kids at the school started throwing stones at them. So anyway, these drag queens decided that they weren't going to put up with this shit from the kids anymore, and they arranged a demonstration that they were going to have. The next morning, we were all getting ready for this demonstration, and we were all standing outside in the front garden, and the police were there, and the South London press were there, and the policeman was saying, you know, you shouldn't be one of those, and homosexuality is terrible, and all the rest of it. And so I told him that there were more homosexuals in the school than there were in that house, and I'd slept with loads of them, and so he told me to prove it. So I grabbed my little schoolboy pen and my little schoolboy notebook and wrote down an ever-increasing list of teachers that I'd slept with, and I could see him salivating wonderfully, and pulled the piece of paper out of my notebook and was just about to hand it to him. And this wonderful drag queen, Michael James, realised what was going on, grabbed the piece of paper from out of his hand virtually, and just popped it in his mouth and chewed it. Which I thought was absolutely wonderful, because it could have caused an awful lot of distress and upset and all the rest of it.
This is the light of our Festival of Light. Praise the Lord.
The most famous demonstration in GLF's history was its disruption of the opening of the Festival of Light, a celebrity-supported religious rally against moral corruption, with the rise of gay visibility high on their hate list.
We infiltrated somebody into their organisation, so we had a whole load of forged tickets for this Westminster Hall do, which was to kick off this fortnight of Christ.
Give me a J! Give me an E! Give me an S!
The proceedings was first interrupted by John Chesterman, who sat right down near the stage and did prolonged clapping. It took them a good 5 minutes to suss out that this man wasn't an enthusiastic Christian, right, that the clapping was very much tongue-in-cheek. So they ejected him.
What does that spell?
People placed strategically all over, and at a particular signal, it just went bananas, and people just didn't know what was going on, because they thought the nuns were real, they thought the preachers were real, they thought everybody was real. Sue Winter and somebody else were dressed up as a preacher and his wife and ran down the aisle shouting "F for Jesus." Then the nuns rushed the stage.
And in between all this, you see, you had all these people trying to sort of like speak, and at every interruption, the choir would suddenly get up and start sort of like singing.
Every time we started screaming, they'd get the choir to sing, but our screams were louder than the choir, so the choir would be asked to sing louder and louder, and we'd get louder and louder, and then they'd sit down, and then they'd stand up, and they'd say, it was complete chaos.
People were really being manhandled very badly by the stewards there. You know, they were being, beaten and kicked. That's Christians for you.
They were terrified of us. They just didn't know what to do, because they were being violent. These were Christian people who were being violent towards us, but we actually weren't being violent back. We were just doing the can-can or laughing, and they just couldn't cope with it, because they expected that if they were violent towards us, we would be violent back. And one of the great things about the Gay Liberation Front was that we made an amazing impact, but we were funny. And we had a good time while we were doing it. And we made people laugh. I mean, even people who didn't like us, you know, cracking up laughing.
After I disgraced myself at school, I thought, well, I'm not going to get an education of the conventional kind, so let's run away and join the circus. And that's what I did. And the circus happened to be a Gay Liberation Front commune in Notting Hill Gate, where I arrived with a change of clothes and a hairbrush in 1971 or thereabouts, 72, summer of 72, to a house lived in by 12 gay men. With communal beds, communal money, everything communal, even our thoughts, lots of LSD and lots of frocks. It was fabulous, and 12 of us continued living there for about a year, signing on, having a market stall, doing occasional bits of temping work, and I spent the next year being what's called a radical. Effeminate queen by some, and one of those silly hippies in Notting Hill Gate probably by the rest of the world.
GLF had succeeded in making gay not merely good, but also trendy. Nowhere more so than in the worlds of fashion and pop music. Preempted in the 60s by hippies and androgynous performers like Mick Jagger, by the 1970s it became common for stars to flirt with the notion of bisexuality. Leading the field by declaring his love for men, as well as women, was David Bowie.
It was like 1972, 73, and I turned the telly on, and he's on the television with Mick Ronson singing Starman. And I remember my grandmother being there, right? And like seeing this guy in makeup and stuff like that, like, and then suddenly put his arm around this other guy, and my heart nearly came through my chest because I thought, this is unbelievable. It was the actual touching of Mick Ronson more than anything else. It's the actual touch of two men on the television, you know. And something snapped in me, and I was like, he's gonna help me, right? And then when I started getting things in the paper and stuff like that about him, and I started like his bisexuality and stuff like that, and I started to realise about bisexuality, and I thought, oh my God, it's something that I can look up to. And tentatively, when I was meeting new people, I used to say I was bisexual, right? Because it was like a foot in the door, right? I mean, I'm a raving fruit, like, but I mean, a foot in the door. And he was the one that helped me a lot. He did, because he was out there, okay, he was famous and stuff like that. It was something to look up to, something that I'd never, ever come across in my life, and it filled me with hope.
The gay is good message was now spreading across the country, with GLF's own newspaper Come Together, and the national magazine launched in its wake, Gay News. For many gay people, this was their first taste of a whole new world opening up to them.
And I remember me first ever putting my hands on this thing, and reading it from cover to cover, over and over and over. I'm like, this is my world. I'm not alone here. There's millions of us. And when I seen the contact ads, I was like, I can't believe this. Because you do, man, you think you're the only one. You know, you think, hold on a minute. And it was like holding it close to me. And just even touching it and carrying it around with me and stuff like this and wearing it in my pocket. It was like, look at me. You know, I'm gay, they're not saying it. You know, please be behind me and read Gay News.
Out of the office, out of the home, out from under, women unite.
GLF effected a huge change in gay visibility in the early 70s. But within the organisation, all was not well. After only a couple of years, the men and the women split, with the women seeing the growing feminist movement as a way of fighting for political change, as women and as lesbians.
The women left GLF one meeting, and I actually wasn't involved in the organisation of that. It actually did come as quite a surprise to me when it actually happened. But in retrospect, I had to agree with what happened. It was really the attitude of the men. I mean, just because they were gay men didn't mean that they weren't men. And they basically treated us like shit. One of the ways we made money was to sell cups of tea and coffee. And they always expected the women to do it. And we did for ages until we suddenly thought, hang on a minute here. You know, Why should we be doing it? You know, you aren't paralysed. You know, what did your last servant die of?
Keep young and beautiful. It's your duty to be beautiful.
What we were really striving for was equality and independence, of always having to ask men to do things for us. And so it was very necessary for us to be able to be self-sufficient and do things for ourselves. So we got into all sorts of groups and learned how to do plumbing, learned how to do car mechanics, learned how to do all the so-called, described at the time, was manual skills, manual labour and stuff like that. We expected far too much of ourselves at times, you know, because, you know, you'd need a pane of glass or a pipe mending or something like that in the winter when you get the freeze up and you get one of the women in to, you know, do the plumbing, etc., etc., and she'd make an absolute asshole of it, yeah? And you felt, you know, what do I do? Do I say this? Do I say this is awful or wah, 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 wah? I think we had far too much expectations of ourselves. We were running ahead too fast. And it took me an awful long time to get out of role-playing and accept that the partner that I was now with was totally equal to me, because I had adapted a lot of male ways over the years, and I had to literally stop myself from running ahead and opening a door for this woman. It was crazy, because I had been in the ghetto for that long, an innocent kid out of Ireland, learned a whole new role, and now I had to undo that whole thing. Even though I was happy to do it, it was still very, very difficult to let go. And of course, the whole sex thing in the bed was, I wanted to be on top all the time. And of course, when there's two people who want to make love in an equal sense, that's just not on. So there was sharing in every aspect of the word. And it took a long time for me to let go, but I did, and I was glad I did. But it wasn't easy. I wouldn't recommend it.
I mean, I became a lesbian separatist for about 4 or 5 years. I mean, to the extent where I wouldn't even ask the bus conductor for my fare. I'd just give him the money, and it was like I was a deaf mute or something, you know. I just, no matter how many times he asked me, he was a man, and there was no way I was going to tell him what I wanted, so he was just getting the fare. I wouldn't talk to men. I wouldn't buy food in shops that were run by men. I mean, you know, it sounds ridiculous now, but it was really important. It was like an evolutionary process. It was like, you know, sort of the chrysalis. It makes you what you are today. You have to go through all those stages to realise, you know, perhaps some of them were a bit silly, but they were all important. They make you the person you are today. And, you know, I can see things a lot differently, and hopefully I'm a bit more compassionate now than I was, having gone through those stages.
I think I knew in theory that some people fancied their own kind, but I knew nothing about it at all. Completely innocent of it. Except I had this terrible suspicion that nice girls didn't do things like that, and it wouldn't be acceptable. When I was 21, I went into an Anglican religious community on the south coast, and the very first Christmas, one of our sisters took me to a carol service in the local church, and we met a girl whom the sister knew, who turned out to be Anne. And we all sat together for the carol service, and I was absolutely fascinated by her. And within a very short time, we were totally inseparable. The Christmas after she came in, she was ill. I think she had German measles. And because it was Christmas, I got permission to take her supper tray. So I gave her supper and went back to collect her tray. And I kissed her goodnight, but in a normal, conventual fashion, just politely on her cheek. But my tummy turned over. And then I realised how I felt about her. And I spent a great deal of time after that pretending it hadn't happened, because I was rather frightened. And we never talked about it. I never told anybody. I never even told Anne.
Girl I was engaged to for 18, so it was 19 and a half. And then it was like 3 weeks before everything was going to take form, and I said to this girl, listen, I've got something to tell you, you know, I'm gay, and there's no way I can go through with any marriage or anything. And she started crying. And I said, look, I'm sorry, but you've got to know now, because I mean, otherwise I'm going to bugger your life up, bugger my life up, bugger And she said, no, I'm happy. And I said, well, I said, so am I. And she was a lesbian, right? And she went, do you want to meet my girlfriend? And I went, oh, hold on a minute, give us like, 10 minutes to get hold of this. And I couldn't believe it.
Eventually, Anne left the community. We kept in touch until I was ill and I had to come out. And I determined then that I wouldn't see her again because I was frightened of what would happen if I did. Got married eventually and had my children. And I couldn't cope with the sexual side of being married. I tried very hard. I was a disaster. So I slept in my own bedroom. I still lived in the same house and brought up my children and stayed great friends with my poor husband until I had news of Anne again.
It was New Year's Eve, just over 19 I was. This girl said, do you want to go to a club? Now, I'd never been to a club in my life, I hadn't had a drink at all, right? And I said, yeah, okay. Went into town, went to this door, and this little thing came, and this person knew this girl, so come in, what's going on here? Went in and was sitting there, and I said to this girl, two fellas holding hands? And she went, yeah, it's a gay club, and my stomach went like this, right? And these two fellas kissed, and I went to toilet and threw up. I mean, it was just something I'd want to do, but I'd never seen it before. I mean, I was like this. My first, she threw me in the deep end, and that was the Bears Paw in Liverpool. And it was just the most frightening, sickening, and yet the most stunning thing that's ever happened to me was that first off hit, And I see these two guys kissing, and I just wanted to look. And that's how she introduced me.
GLF's attitude of wanting the best for gay people extended to fun as well as politics. Gay clubs no longer had to be secret, furtive rooms in the back of pubs, and a social scene exploded throughout the decade, culminating in the opening of the biggest, brightest, and most advanced club in London. Totally and 100% gay, its name reflected what it was to thousands of people. Heaven.
Every time I'm near you, whirling like a cyclone in my...
It's just amazing to look down and see all these people. I mean, all these men, all these girls, being themselves. And I'm not kidding. I'm thinking, this is my family, this. Okay, you get some shitheads in your family, but there's, the majority of them. And I was like, I couldn't believe it, like, buoying you up. It used to carry me along for days, thinking, my God, I can go back to this place and stuff. It was just a buzz.
You wander in, and the whole idea is to be as gay as you possibly can, even if you bring the clothes for it in your shopping bag, and change when you're there. And suddenly you have 2,000 men, all looking more glorious, each one looking more glorious than the next, necking and kissing and smooching, and you've created a gay nirvana in this wonderful black hole where you have the best light show in Europe, you have the most up-to-date sounds, and you have nobody turning round. You are inhabiting nobody else's space. You're inhabiting your own, and your own space is I'm here, I'm gay, and there is no problem.
Never happened in history. People today don't understand this. It had never happened that you could walk into a room, 300, 500, 1,000 people, all with the same sexual orientation, all loving being there, all there because they want to be there, creating a fabulous environment, and one which at the end of the night, everyone knew you were going to get off with some other lovely person and have fun. And that was historic. So at last, the gap between the rhetoric of gay liberation and the reality of it was being bridged, and it was being bridged by something as fantastically ordinary as disco.
Are you ready for Freddie?
At the same time, coincidentally, Freddie Laker, one of the straightest men in Britain, I suppose, established an airline called Laker Airways, which was cheap flights to the States And I don't think he knows how many young gay guys he flew virginally across the Atlantic to America to be absolutely stunned and astonished by the scene they saw over there, and who brought back from the States a lot of the music and a lot of the attitudes, a lot of the politics, and a lot of the social dynamics of the American gay scene.
Yes, you can sail the seven seas. In the Navy. Yes, you can put your mind at ease. In the Navy.
So many of us became clones, and we all had a moustache. Even people who looked ridiculous in moustaches had a moustache. And we all had our shorts or our cut-offs and our work boots and construction helmets and so on. And this is how we all changed when we went to the discos. It was an extraordinary environment. It had a whole set of complicated rules about how you behaved and so on. One of the extraordinary fashions we had, I don't know if it was a fashion, was something called the hanky code. In that whole process, this kind of mating dance, this ritual, you were taking in all the cues, of course, about what this person was into. And it was tremendously important for some reason in the 70s and 80s to know if someone was active or passive. Namely, in other words, in sodomy, whether they took it or they gave it. And there was an easy way of working this out, and everyone followed the rules, because you were only supposed to be one thing or the other, or at least one thing or the other on any one night. And if you wore your keys or your hanky in your left-hand side, back pocket of your jeans, or your keys on the left-hand hip, it meant you were active. It meant you were the butch one, I suppose. And if you wore your hanky in your right back pocket, or your keys on your right-hand side, it meant you were passive. And then, colour of the handkerchief told you what the person was into. Consequently, if you were into anal sex and oral sex, you had to wear two handkerchiefs. So these handkerchiefs became really very fine material indeed. And you could, and I jest not, you could go in and you could see a guy in a disco with 4 or 5 different coloured handkerchiefs in his back pocket. And this would be a catalogue, basically, of his sexual repertoire. And all of this to save that dreadful thing ever happening, namely that you should ever talk to anyone about sex and what they were into. And at the disco, often I would stand. I'd love to watch all this fun going on, because I was politically working for it, and here we were reaping the rewards. And I remember looking out at it, and I remember the moment I thought it, we have won our place in the sun at last. And I remember thinking that and was sure of it. I was sure it had come. And we had, for a moment, something.
66 women were arrested today after they'd cut down a section of the security fence.
Though for men, gay liberation had brought nightlife, fun and sex, the women's social scene was slower to develop. For many lesbians, political activity continued to be a high priority, many going on in the early 80s to join peace camps like Greenham.
3 women gay rights protesters caused pandemonium in the House of Lords when they abseiled from the public gallery onto the floor of the chamber.
In the House of Lords, a vote is taking place now on a challenge to the poll tax. Tory rebels have said...
Protesting about rights for lesbian and gay people.
These high-profile lesbian protests were at the heart of the row over the biggest challenge to gay rights for over 20 years, Clause 28.
Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay.
Clause 28 of the Local Government Act was introduced by the Tories to halt what they saw as a rising promotion of homosexuality. It was provoked in the first instance by the use in some London schools of Jenny Lives with Eric and Martin, a book about a child living with her gay father and his partner. Clause 28 suggested that gay relationships and gay families were unnatural compared to straight ones, and even threatened to remove all gay literature from public places like libraries. For the first time since the heyday of GLF, the gay community became seriously angry.
Margaret Thatcher tried just to wipe out lesbians and gay men by introducing Section 28. I mean, I can't get the wording exactly right, but I think the wording of the last line of Section 28 was something like,
the intentional promotion of homosexuality by local authorities shall be forbidden because homosexuals are incapable of anything other than pretend relationships and pretend families. So actually, you're all looking at a hologram, actually. I don't really exist. I'm a pretend person. When you go, I'm going to evaporate into the mist because I'm pretending to be a person. I mean, have you ever heard anything so absolutely ridiculous? And if it wasn't so dangerous, it'd be funny.
But I'd like to think that people see me as Tony, not as Tony the fruit. You know what I mean? But this Clause 28 thing was totally out of order. I was making us second-class citizens, and like me for one, I wasn't going to have it. So that's why I went on the march, my first march. It was a buzz. It was great. But there were straight people there, mothers and fathers of gay kids. You know what I mean? Straight people who didn't know just were there to do it. It was sound, brilliant.
People were seriously angry, and if the police had done anything, we'd have beaten the shit out of the police. I mean, we had what have we got to lose? We had everything to gain, but we had nothing to lose. It was just amazing, and I think it scared the government.
Got to tell you about this, right? When we were in Manchester, we went up Clause 28, and there was a line of policemen, and we were all going, 2, 4, 6, 8, is that copper really straight? And he went, no. And like, yes, you know, it was great. That was just fantastic. And we were like, whoa. Quite good looking as well. And I remember praying for days, please don't let this go through. Please don't let this go through, don't we? And I was at the sink doing some dishes, and the telly was on, and the news said, Clause 28 has gone through, and I sobbed. I actually sobbed. I couldn't believe it.
I heard from the convent that the sister, to whom I was still so close, was dying very suddenly from cancer. And she said, darling, will you do something for me? Well, she was my best friend. She was dying. I'd have done anything for her. But she said, do you remember Anne Lewis? Will you write to her for me?
She wrote to me, and I wrote back a letter which said, don't dare lose touch again. Still not realising. And then we arranged to meet. It wasn't until that first day that we met each other again that I began to start to think, good gracious, perhaps I am a lesbian.
Every time I thought about her, my tummy went to jelly and I just felt all happy. I just knew that all I wanted was to be with Anne at whatever cost. And there was a cost. A few weeks later, we found ourselves splashed across one of the less reputable Sunday papers. Somebody who had seen me and Anne together at a party recognised me from my photograph and from my Christian name and took the newspaper cutting to Anne's boss, and Anne very nearly lost her job.
I was teaching in a primary school, and in the eyes of society, a gay or lesbian person is a danger to children. I was worried that there would be problems for the school if it became known that I was a lesbian. I had always kept my personal life separate, but luckily the people I worked for and with were bigger than that, so the consequences weren't as bad as I feared.
It was not a very pleasant time. Somebody else took great pleasure in taking it to my father. So it was extremely uncomfortable, and we never discovered who had told the story in the first place, or why. And then, on the Sunday, we went to church as usual, and the church door was shut in our faces, and we were told that we were not welcome to make our communion at church.
The homophobia that erupted in the 80s was no more apparent than in tabloid coverage of the AIDS epidemic. Though the first British cases of the disease were known of in the early part of the decade, by 1985, headlines like these were almost weekly events, with the tragic stories of those who were dying from AIDS all but ignored in favour of a rampant bout of journalistic queer-bashing.
The hatred that was coming out from, and still is coming out, obviously, but the hatred was naked. You know, the Sun and the Daily Mail and all those people, I mean, the gloves were off. The gloves were off. Not that they've ever been on, you know, but it was totally obvious that if they had their way, they'd have shot us all.
a friend of mine was in the Middlesex hospital, and he had AIDS and he was very sick, and this was in the early days, and they didn't even have an AIDS ward as such in those days. But what they used to do, it was really strange. I mean, I got quite angry, and I actually pushed somebody. They would knock on his door, leave his food on the floor and run away, but how the fuck could he get out of the bed? He was so sick, you know, and I mean, how could he get to the door to get his food? They had rubber gloves and masks and all sorts of really strange things. I either pushed the nurse or grabbed the nurse and just shook them and said, you know, how dare you do this? This is ridiculous. I mean, this man's dying and he's not even allowed to die with any dignity. You're starving him to death.
There is now a danger that has become a threat to us all. It is a deadly disease and there is no known cure.
Official responses to the early panic over AIDS were often heavy-handed and confused, with the government and the health authorities trying to work out what should be done.
So don't die of ignorance.
The gay community itself took on board much of the responsibility for providing clear, practical health advice. Then, as today, it was considered vital to be sexually forthright and get the safer sex message across. Through pioneering support groups like the Terence Higgins Trust, lesbians and gay men rallied forces to curb what threatened to be a devastating epidemic.
Well, I got into buddying and counselling, and I had quite a few encounters which were rather heartbreaking, until you get less involved with each person, because you'd rather tempting to take it all upon yourself, and you can't do that. And I know the first funeral I went to, I broke my heart. I was sobbing and crying all over the place. Couldn't help it, this young fellow. Eventually he'd gone blind. He was only a young kid of about 19. And I can't tell you how many funerals I've been to, but it was very, very sad. The next guy I had, he lived in the same district. One morning I went, and the nurse couldn't come. He was having a district nurse to come to wash him and bath him and give him his medication. And this morning that I went, she couldn't come. But he said he really would love a bath. So I got everything ready and washed this young fellow. And he got Kaposi's sarcoma, which is sort of black marks, very tender spots all over his body. I know he had one on the side of his nose. He could hardly bear me to put the flannel over him. And then when I came washing his body and his private parts, and he was so gentle doing it, and he kept saying, "Oh, oh," you know, he couldn't even bear a light finger on him. Oh, it was so sad. I'm not a religious person. I felt I was washing Jesus' feet when I was washing that body. It was all emaciated and he was suffering. And I felt so humble. And I thought, well, fancy me of all people being chosen to do this work. How wonderful. And I felt very humble about it.
By the time we were 5 years into the epidemic, Alice and I had buried most of our friends. It was a phenomenon, really, of the later part of the 80s that there were a lot of gay people going around who didn't have any long-standing friends. I mean, I'm talking about friends from going back 10 years. Alistair, however, was firmly of the view that you could tell if you had the virus inside you. He'd heard it from so many of his friends and my friends saying, I just knew I had it. And he went for a blood test without telling me and got a diagnosed positive result. And we were just devastated because, you know, we thought this was, I mean, it was like Passover. It was like this was one household that hadn't come to, and thank God, and, you know, now we could concentrate on helping our friends. And then suddenly, you know, it had marched into our own happy little home and life. The real magnitude of it came home when we told his mum and his sister together. And I had the sense that we were about to say something. We were about to use language in a way which was going to completely and utterly change someone's life. to tell a mother that her son may die very soon from AIDS, there was an awful sense of responsibility for what you were doing. And I could understand, being there, how Alistair must have felt telling me, because you knew once the words were out, you couldn't take them back. And there were no words to ameliorate, to soften this blow. There could be no one in the country who did not know what AIDS was, and there would be no one in the country who did not know what it did to people. And Alistair's mother was an intelligent and sensitive, articulate, bright woman. And so he told her that she was, and his sister were both just in tears and devastated by it. They'd been huge friends to Alistair and to me. Even though Alistair and I split as lovers and remained friends, I still feel part of that family and that friendship. But again, the sense of being a witness, but participating in something awful happening, and realizing that this virus was really tearing the hearts apart of everyone who loved each other that we knew, and it affected everyone. And but people are so brave, you know. And in the face of all of this, people dig deep and it is through that set of emotional experiences of that kind of depth, accepting those responsibilities, that we have all labored for years. And yet, still, I think that the triumph is that we do so loving those we've lost, loving those we're losing, and still being men enough to be prepared to love again.
By July 1996, 27,000 people in Britain had been diagnosed HIV positive, a figure marked by the release of one red balloon for each of them at the biggest annual event in the lesbian and gay calendar, the Pride Festival. For one day each year, thousands of gay people of all ages come out onto the streets of London in a defiant show of pride in their sexuality.
I'm Grace Hughes. I'm 16 years old and I'm gay. I came out when I was 13 in school, and I came out to my parents last year, just before my 15th birthday. So I came home from school at dinner time, told my mum, I went back to school and ran away, and all she said was, you know, basically when I came back home from school, she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, that's fine, it doesn't bother me." Because attitudes have changed so much since, you know, the 70s and even since the 80s, because it's become more accepted and people have realised that there's nothing different about it, and because more people are coming out, it makes it easier, because there are more people who can say, look, I'm not the only one, I'm not different at all, you know, and you can point to all these people and say, this person's successful, this person does this and they're all gay and it doesn't make a difference. And I said, oh, I want to go to Pride, I want to go to London. And my parents first of all weren't going to let me, but in the end they did. And it was unbelievable. It was breathtaking to be there because there were so many people, and all of them gay, and it was just like a carnival, you know. We disrupted London life for a day, and it was absolutely marvellous. And it made me feel very powerful as well, because with so many people, if you get someone on the side of the road sticking their fingers up you, there's 200,000 odd standing there doing it back. I mean, they're not going to win. It was the one day when I felt more powerful than all the people ridiculing me.
From its humble beginning in 1971, when a few hundred GLF members marched through London, Pride now demonstrates how far things have changed for lesbian and gay people in Britain. With an annual march attended by nearly 100,000, followed by an open-air party which attracts over double that number.
I do feel the need to live as a gay man all the time, to have a good network of gay friends and straight friends. And I look forward to years to come as a gay man. I'm not afraid of growing old as a gay man, because I'm confident that I'll be growing old, I hope, with thousands and thousands of other gay men, lesbians, and that we'll all be able to kind of fix ourselves up with a community that looks after us, and that we can input wisdom and hope, pass on information to the next generations of gay people.
Five years ago was the first time we went to Pride. It was wonderful. It was like Christmas.
Yes, it was just being with the family, I suppose.
And being normal for a whole day.
Yeah.
Being the majority for once. When I was at Pride 3 years ago, I was commissioned by the children to bring them back suitable T-shirts. The only ones we could find said, "Dyke mums are everywhere." So they have them and they wear them with great pride.
They're totally involved, they're totally unashamed of the fact that their mother and I are gay. They both feel a certain pride in the fact that we're both prepared to accept the way we are and prepared to stand up for what we are. As far as they're concerned, if two people love each other, they should be together.
What are all these people out there in television land, right, who are thinking, well, if I told my boss that I was gay, what would happen? You know? If I actually turned round and started to explore my sexuality, what would happen? And you think to yourself, well, you know, do you want to live the rest of your life with the light off? Because that's a bit what it's like. Once again, you know, the threat of HIV and, you know, an early death, or an earlier death than I expected, says to me is, do it now. Don't wait. Turn the light on, because it's really nice in the light. And if you don't turn it on, then you'll never know what anything else looks like.
Julian is living with HIV and still enjoys wearing frocks on a regular basis. Juno continues to be active in lesbian and gay politics. Tony is a voluntary worker for a number of community projects. Lucia makes sculptures of women out of breeze blocks. Michael enjoys a quiet life in Brighton with his dog Rusty. Barbara continues to have many lesbian and gay friends of all ages. Derek is an advocate and lives in Edinburgh with his lover Lee. Anne is a self-employed shepherd and Marika a happy housewife. They remain regular churchgoers. Grace will soon leave school and hopes one day to act.